All right. So Daria reached out to me to reach out to Gutian to have a debate over some tweets and videos. So I guess I'm gonna let Daria go first and just talk about what his contention was.
Yeah, so kind of talked to Gushin yesterday, and we sorted some of it out, I guess. I think my biggest sort of contention was with, I guess, with one specific tweet, and then maybe the following tweets that sort of, I guess, indicated that she was like very much against Biden. But we talked about it, and I don't know. Do you want to maybe explain yourself, Gushin, or should we bring up the tweet? I don't know how much you want to go into that specifically.
Sure. I mean, I don't mind necessarily bringing up the tweets and stuff. The one thing I'd be against doing if we're going to avoid it at all would be to not bring up perhaps particular stuff or whatnot around other content creators and whatnot. So like no Vosh shit, Destiny shit and whatnot, because it just seems that's just going to lead to drama shit at some point.
Sure.
And it's gonna get me into like I'm gonna end up getting reamed on other people's streams. I just can't be asked doing that.
Sure. Sounds good. So I guess so the tweet that I had an issue with was Gushin wrote, if you support Biden, then you are the fucking stupidest leftist progressive person that exists on this side. And as somebody who supports Biden, I felt hurt. My feelings were hurt. And yeah.
Yep. So, which part do you need me to deal with regards to that tweet?
So I guess why? Well, first off, I guess, do you think that it's very stupid for like a leftist progressive person to support Biden?
I think there's probably an element of issue to discuss there in the idea of the word support, probably.
Okay.
So I think there's a difference between you going out and voting for Biden and you supporting Biden.
Okay.
Where support I would describe as you being avidly going out defending everything, defending Biden's policies, defending Biden's positions, defending Biden's stances in the past and currently, and openly expressing that Biden is the best bet that you can think of, and and having this like the sort of support that I saw people having for Bernie and shit, right? Whereas like I feel like conceding and being like, okay, well, my candidate I wanted to pick is gone, I guess I'll vote for this one now, doesn't seem like supporting as such, as much as it's just like you picking the next best option you can see.
Sure, but wouldn't you say like if we're picking the next best option, which is still like the currently best option, wouldn't you say that it would be justified to sort of, I guess, support that option, like compared to worst option?
So, but by support there, what are you asking for from people? Right? That's what I'm saying.
Sure. So I guess maybe this was gonna bring us into your video, but I personally believe that it is good to advocate for Biden. Obviously, I don't condone like the past bad things that he's done or the bad votes that he's cast, and I don't believe in bringing like disingenuous arguments. But I do think Biden has some things that you can definitely support as a leftist in good faith and be like happy about it, I guess.
Right, but does there not need to be a recognition, I think, of when taking into account someone's policies and platforms, that while individual things might be good, there needs to be some sort of recognition of an overall theme or an overall feel that you can get from their previous record and their current situation about how good that might be, right? I mean, so to make it very clear, I'm not arguing that Biden is worse than Trump or is as bad as Trump. I'm not going to make claims like that.
Sure.
And in that interest, I would say if you are on the fence, and I've said this multiple times, I'm going to have to keep repeating myself forever. If you're on the fence, but you're not sure about who you're going to vote for Biden.
Yeah. And I believe you also in your videos, I might be misquoting you, but I believe you said you should probably vote for Biden if you're like on the fence or like you're unsure.
That was me covering my ass for, if who knows, at some point in the future Biden might do something so heinous that people physically that people change their opinion on him. I'm covering my ass for shit happening in the future that I can't foresee.
Sure. All right. So okay. So so do you? Okay. So let me ask you a few questions. So do you think that Biden has some like currently has some good things going for him in terms of like the progressive movement?
I believe that there are policies that he has in his current platform that are in line with the general progressive movement.
Okay. And do you think that if elected, that he would try and pass, like, I guess, a majority of those policies?
Less confident.
I guess then I'll ask you why.
I feel like Biden. Oh, sorry. I feel based on the evidence that I've seen from Biden's record, and also the measures that Biden has voted on, and his position in the Democrat Party, it feels like he is more than anything else a moderate Democrat, if not leaning slightly more on the conservative side. And to that end, I feel like most of those policies are either things that he is saying that I don't know if he'll actually put a lot of effort into, because he hasn't seemed to put a lot of effort into them in the past, or hasn't put a lot of stock into them in the past, and therefore I feel like they're not going to be at the top of his list of things he wants to get done when he gets into power. I mean, there are things on his platform that are much more in line with the way that the things that he wants to see happen, that will get more focus earlier.
Sure. So let me address those points. So there were 2 points there. You said the first point was that you don't think he's going to put a lot of effort into passing them because they, I guess some of them disagree with something that he's done in the past. I think to that extent, I think it's important, at least for me, to recognize that the sort of the Democratic Party as a whole and sort of the Overton window in America like moves left and right. And I think the Democratic Party tries to sort of follow that Overton window, in a sense that if you look at the policies of even somebody like Michael Bloomberg, like even Michael Bloomberg would have very progressive policies stated on his website, because it seems like that is the way that the Democratic Party is moving towards right now, because of the work that Bernie Sanders has done during this and the past election. And then to the other point, I would say that him being a moderate Democrat is actually, in this case, a good thing, because it shows that moderate Democrats are for relatively progressive policies, like a $15 minimum wage, like forgiving some student loan debt, like free college for like people who can't afford it, stuff like that.
Sure, but the argument you hear yet again isn't whether or not the Democrats have been slowly conceding more and more territory to the progressive movement in the party, as such as it is that I am worried that Biden's concessions are concessions that potentially won't get passed, much in the same way that a lot of politicians, especially in America more than anywhere else, make concessions that they don't necessarily follow up on or succeed in achieving.
Sure, but wouldn't you? So wouldn't you say that like presidents try and pass most of the policies that they campaign on or like have on their website? It has definitely been the case for the past like 20 years.
Without having a list of evidence with regards to this kind of thing, I couldn't say the percentage things of it. I believe that as far as passing all the policies that they had listed, I think there were a couple that wasn't. I believe weren't like Bill Clinton and Barack Obama reasonably weak as far as that went.
No, I mean Barack Obama like did as much as he could to like get Guantanamo Bay shut down, and Barack Obama like in terms of like passing healthcare, like that was one of his big points. I mean, the things that he campaigned on or like talked about during his campaign, and the same with Trump as well. I mean, they tried passing them too. I mean, you can say, I mean, trying isn't passing them. Obviously, that's true, but at the end of the day, the president doesn't have like unilateral power.
Sure, but like I said, what I'm saying, it's the Barack Obama would be, I consider, probably a lot more leaning into the progressive side, if not he wasn't a progressive as much as he used progressive policies and stuff, but he used the image of progressive policies, and when he got into power, it felt like. I mean, do you have any things I can use to like view with regards to Barack Obama putting all his effort into past things?
I mean, sure, you can look up like Obama, Guantanamo Bay.
Like Obama's promised policies, and then like how many of those he achieved is like a easy site to like see
I mean, I don't have like a comprehensive list on hand. It was just like off the top of my head. But I mean, if you want, we can just move away from that. Okay, maybe we should just talk about your video. Would that be okay?
Yeah, sure.
So you talk a lot about the sort of the two-party system versus like the parliamentary system. Like in New Zealand, you have a parliamentary system, right?
We have MMP, yeah.
Yeah. Like in Denmark, we also have like a parliamentary system, and I think the United States system isn't necessarily that far off from like our system in Denmark, like our parliamentary system, if you sort of get into the nuance. Because yes, the United States has like a two-party system, or like I mean, you do have the like third parties and the Green Party or whatever, but within those two-party systems, there exists like different coalitions, and you sort of address this as well in your video when you talk about the Tea Party. But wouldn't you also say that this exists for like the Democratic Party in terms of like the Black Caucus and like the Freedom Caucus, like Justice Democrats and stuff like that? I mean, there's a lot of different coalitions there that exist, sort of like they aren't like necessarily their own parties, but they're like parts of the democratic system that need to be pleased in order to like pass policy from a democratic point of view.
So the initial thing I think to get into here before we start getting into the whatever the hell happened after that initial point would be the argument that the MMP and whatnot that you see in countries like Germany or in New Zealand, and I don't know what Denmark's system is exactly, but the idea that is in any way similar or similar enough that when we get to the nuance, it basically is almost the exact same as America is, I think, a bold claim to make there. The American. So I mean, the main. I'm just checking Denmark's political system right now because I haven't really done that much research into Denmark. But between New Zealand and between America, I can say that there is a large scale of difference in the way that they operate and the way that they not just general elections function, but also local elections occur as well. Of course, there's a severe difference in the way, especially with general elections. General elections, I think, would be the biggest one because the general election in the US with the I forgot what the name of it is, the Electoral College, with the way the Electoral College operates and the way each state is effectively its own. The way each state is basically a winner takes all situation, and then also taking into account the fact that you can the issues with regards to like it all being in place voting and all, like also in person voting and everything. Like when we actually start looking at the nuance, I think that the differences between the systems become more and more apparent.
Sure, right? Sure. So I'm not necessarily talking about the differences. I'm aware that there are differences. I'm talking about the similarities in terms of like how do you get policies passed, like through coalitions. And I think like especially if I look at, I mean, I'm sure it's similar in New Zealand as well. But like the parties, usually isn't there usually like a majority party, and then there's like small parties that sort of have to go there to like build the coalition that's enough to like get 50%. Would that be like
basically, yeah.
Yeah. So usually it would be like the majority party has like a lot of policies, like has a broad platform, and then the minority parties will sort of go in there and try and pull it in like a certain direction, or like have sort of wedge issues that they would need passed in order to like support the majority's platform. And I think that's very similar in terms of like how it works in America as well. I mean, to some extent, when you think about sort of how the smaller coalitions in like the Senate or the House, how they have to get the votes passed or have enough votes to actually get like a majority, right?
Sure, and I agree. I agreed with the concept there in my video. I believe, if I remember my own video correctly here, I agreed in the idea that there is a relative amount of power. And I mean, the Tea Party, I think I chose much more specific because the Tea Party one was very much like a bunch of people with a large amount of funding coming in and drastically changing the way that a party functioned through effectively what amounted to bullying of some kind of the system. But like the way that like those coalitions work, I was advocating for the fact that progressives should recognize that they have a capability in the Democrat Party, I think, to work a lot closer with each other in a way that I don't necessarily see. The progressives are relatively weak right now as far as the sense of like actually being a formidable group within the DNC. There doesn't seem to be like a unified movement as such, which I think is, if anything, evidenced by Elizabeth Warren's recent what was it? What do you call it? Recent endorsement of 20 women, which included like it missed a whole bunch of progressive women that are currently either up for re-election the next couple of years, which I think it showed a lack of coalition or coalescing around that.
Sure. So I have a question in terms of like the Progressive Party, I guess, or the progressive part of the Democratic Party. So you say that the Tea Party has a lot of influence over the Republican, sort of the Republican Party. But
I don't think they're too operative anymore.
Yeah, sure. So wouldn't you say the fact that like most Democratic candidates have adopted like Bernie-esque policies, and both in 2016, like Hillary shifted a lot of her platform towards like Bernie's platform at the end, and so has Joe Biden done, and like all the moderate Democrats have done this time around. Like they are effectively combating Bernie by bringing their policies closer towards like what Bernie is proposing and not over to the Republican side. Like they're moving further left. Like wouldn't you say that's the progressive movement sort of pushing the party in that direction?
So the moving left of the party is in comparison to where it was at 20 years ago, sure, it's moving further left. But the ideas that have been expressed here that have been said, hey, maybe these ideas we should get into the US, into like the US kind of thing, I don't think are necessarily anything that's like drastically progressively new, right? Like they're still quite old ideas. I mean, I don't
know. I think the fact
healthcare is a pretty basic idea that I think people have been talking about for decades at this point in America.
Sure,
maybe
but
not seriously for a while, but like it's still been like a thing that people have asked for that's been blanketly ignored.
Sure, but like something like a $15 minimum wage is something that Bernie has campaigned for very like hard, and that is like a mainstream Democratic policy now. Something like abolishing private prisons. I don't think that's like a thing that existed like in the past. I mean, we can go through like a whole number of like free college education. I don't think that's like something that as people have been talked about for a while before Bernie sort of brought it to the mainstream. I mean,
so another issue that I would say with the Democrat Party and with this argument of like, oh, they're adopting these progressive movements and adopting these ideas would be the problem that the adoption or the working within the language and concepts used by a progressive thing doesn't necessarily guarantee that they're going to actually move that way when they get into power. I mean, a great example of adopting words or ideas that allow you to get to power without actually end up doing any of that kind of stuff would be, I think, Trump, right? I mean, Trump was a key mover of adopting populist ideas and populist movement stuff, and then not actually passing a lot of that stuff when he got to power.
I mean, he did like try and pass a lot of the stuff. I mean, the bans on immigration, the like the building of the wall. I mean,
that stuff. I'm specifically more focusing on the ideas of draining the swamp and the.
I'm sure if you ask
working Americans and stuff,
I'm sure if you ask Trump, he would say that he's draining the swamp. I mean,
sure, but I mean, if I could ask Trump, Trump said today that you could inject disinfectant into your veins. I don't know if I necessarily trust Donald Trump's assessment of his own capabilities.
No, sure, but like when they're trying to pass policies from their point of view, I mean, like when they say drain the swamp, they don't mean bring in fucking Bernie Sanders and progressive people who work for the people. They mean bring in people more who think like me, and that's like what Trump is doing, right? He's trying to bring in more people who think like him because that's what he thinks is draining the swamp.
The argument I'm making there is along the lines of the fact that his promises that he was making to the American people with regards to retrieving the economic increases and stuff for the working class, for the people who voted, who got him into power, basically, he didn't end up really following through on all that kind of stuff.
I mean, he's bringing back jobs. Like, he's bringing back coal mining jobs and all of these things.
I believe
right?
the coal mining jobs were a minute amount in comparison to what was lost,
Sure.
and a lot of those jobs that were brought back were ended up getting lost over the course of the next like couple of years after that, if I'm correct on the coal mining stuff.
Well,
Like,
I mean, I agree, but like the point isn't that he is gonna succeed in doing all the things. The point is that he's gonna try and pass them and like work towards them during his administration, like the tariffs, the bringing back jobs. Again, I agree that he didn't bring back as many jobs, or if any, maybe. But he did try and do it, and like he did put tariffs in place. He did go tough on China. Like he did those things.
So the argument, so the Biden argument, I guess there would be that could he not also attempt to do the things, but doing it in his own way that doesn't actually end up achieving it in a solution that actually is like matching the progressive movements that he's trying to adopt, or he's not trying to adopt, but
Sure.
progressive movements that he's trying to appeal to.
Sure. I mean, and again, I mean, there's a good chance that he's not going to get anything passed if he gets into office. If the Democrats lose the Senate and the House, I mean, that's a very real chance. It doesn't mean that he doesn't try or like that he isn't fighting for those things, right? I mean, just because he is unsuccessful doesn't mean that he doesn't run on that platform or try and pass them.
Sure, but the issue I think the issue there is not necessarily him being unsuccessful. It's him being successful, but him attempting to achieve that success in a way that is not benefit. Like the Medicare would be one example, right? Like he's ultimately, is he trying to achieve this success of getting better healthcare for people? Probably, but is the methodology that he's adopting there, i.e., the mixture of single payer with also mixture of universal healthcare with
Public
also
option.
having the public option and private options, mixing that thing, is that actually going to be beneficial to the people, or is that in fact going to be beneficial to the insurance companies? That would be the argument there. Is like, is his methodology actually going to be helpful to people,
Sure.
or like Trump, is his methodology actually going to hurt people in the long run?
Sure. I mean,
while giving them the illusion of success.
Sure, and I mean, like based on your video, I'm sure you've looked into like Biden's healthcare plan, and I would say it's pretty easy to say that like Biden's healthcare plan is going to be way better than, or at least is going to be attempted to be way better than was even like done by Obama and like proposed by, I don't know, a lot of Democrats. I think his plan is going to end up being probably more generous than like what Pete was proposing as well. It's like just the fact that you have a public option is like going against the insurance companies, right? Because that's effectively giving them something to that they have to bargain their standards against, that isn't like a private company. So you're basically controlling the price in that sense, and like covering, I don't know, like 25 million more people based on like what is covered now, and I don't know, limiting out-of-pocket costs. Again, that's like going against insurance companies, or negotiating drug prices with like global standards. I would say all of these things are
right. But okay, so I think the I'm not suppressing the right word. If the public option that is selected, or if the, and I'm using the public healthcare thing as purely a methodology here of pointing out that Barack Obama's attempts to fix things might not actually be helpful here, but if those are done in a way that attempts to appease the majority of the Democrat Party, I mean, there's the two arguments there would be, if it's appeasing the Democrat Party, be like, oh look, like we did pass some progressive policies and that's fine, right? Is that not what you wanted? Kind of thing. Like it could be used as a way of trying to halt any further adoption of more progressive ideas and progressive policies, if they can basically just write that off with like kind of like finding a middle ground that isn't really much of a middle ground.
Sure. So you're talking about like a riot tax. Is that the concept you're moving towards? Do you know that concept?
I knew what a riot tax was.
Okay, so I guess the concept of a riot tax is that you give the people something like a gesture to sort of stop them from rioting in the streets and like going on protests and stuff. Like you don't give them exactly what they want or like what they need, but you give them something just to stop them from like rioting.
Yeah. Along those lines, I think like that could be potentially what occurs, or the alternative, which is and this is the problem. This is the problem we start talking about like harm reduction stuff, especially when it comes to politics. Is that quite often politics is a complex system and is a complex thing to understand, in that harm reduction is normally designed. I mean, harm reduction originally comes from, obviously, drug addicts and stuff, and with very focused around one individual's attempts to fix themselves, right? Whereas when it comes to politics, then you have the harm reduction idea. Okay, well, if we try to pass this good thing, is it possible that we're going to see an intense amount of backlash from the right, who will then try to use any failures to get into power to do something even further right wing off of the back of that? Could be an argument there, right? I mean, the harm reduction thing is confusing. It confuses me because it's like, once you start expanding it out to like take into account any potential changes in the future, then the harm reduction falls apart, right? If that makes any sense at all. I might just be sounding like a fucking moron. That's also a possibility.
No. We you definitely do have some arguments there. You had 3 arguments. So first, let's talk about the riot tax. So I would argue that if Bernie was elected into office, somebody we all supported, Bernie would not himself be able to pass like the majority of his policies in their current state. Like he would probably be argued down into a position that I would argue is more similar to like what Biden is proposing right now. And I would say if you sort of look at it through that lens, then I think it's quite silly to be like an adamant supporter of Bernie Sanders, who is proposing things that we all know he isn't gonna keep, and he's probably gonna end up in maybe he would, like, even if I would grant he would be more progressive than Biden, or like get more done than Biden, but at least moving in the same direction, and in the same direction in terms of like getting harm reduced, I guess. Harm reduction, I don't know if you want to use that word. Then in terms of, I guess, let's talk about harm reduction in general. So I think harm reduction in general, I understand that word has like some connotations, and like we don't have to use that word. I just use it for like, that's because that's what people are calling it. I don't. The
connotations are not the issue. The problem with harm reduction is that harm reduction is normally used in situations where you're effectively regarding a very short-term success, where I think politics might need to be. I think politics, generally speaking, needs to be more long-term acknowledgement as well, right?
Sure.
Which is, I think, the problem there.
Sure. So, okay, so this is my issue with the whole concept of like thinking very long-term. Okay, my issue is that, first off, we can see that there are definite harms in the short term of a Trump presidency. We can see, like, Trump isn't just sitting on his hands, right? Like, he's actively passing policies towards his agenda. He's actively, like, throwing immigrants and minorities out of the country. He's actively banning immigration from, like, Muslim countries. Like, I think Trump is, like, been the worst president for Muslims, like, ever. So he's actively taking away people's healthcare. Like, during the Trump presidency, 7 million people have lost healthcare. He's not like keeping the status quo. The military, the trans ban in the military, like, he's actively causing harm. And in terms of like the long-term prospects, well, I mean, I think that is just wild speculation. I mean, I can see that you can sort of build a case, or you can start to build a case in terms of like where you think the world is going to end up 10, 15
sorry,
years.
Someone just reminded me, and I think it's important to bring up here in case anyone's getting confused on that kind of thing, that Trump, as of the end of 2019, had less deportations than Barack Obama did in his first term.
Okay. Well, I mean,
Barack Obama deported at most 409,000 people in 2012 alone. Barack Obama deported 1.2 million people in his first 3 years, and so far in over 3.5 years, Trump has deported under 800,000. Sure.
So I mean, you can say that, but I mean, I can link you an article that says Trump is on track to deport more people than Obama, like by the end. And I can also say, I mean, do you think Obama was more pro-immigration, or Trump is more pro-immigration than Obama is? I don't understand where, like.
So that position there with Barack Obama importing more people would be it's the argument of the Democrats being a party that is capable of, and has been capable in the past, of promising an awful lot and looking good, while ultimately putting in a lot of policies or that are negative and are. I mean, obviously we could bring Barack Obama started the ICE concentration camps kind of thing. That sort of like Biden has quite a few skeletons because, well, like I said, like these are situations where the DNC has been capable of, during their terms, doing things that were very negative and would be considered to be Republican stances or Republican methodologies, but because it's the DNC doing it, it doesn't get quite as much attention or focus.
Sure. So let me push back against that a little bit. So first off, it is important to note that Obama, while he did deport people, first off, he didn't deport more people than previous administrations. This is just an error in like how you count the deportations. And there was a lot of debunking articles about that, like when that was on the rise, like that term, like deporter in chief. Like what actually happened was the definition of like a deportation was changed under Obama. And if you actually look at the actual numbers of like people getting deported from like within the US, like Obama deported 40% less people than like previous like Republican administrations. And in terms of that, like the mass majority of the people that Obama did deport were people who were committing multiple crimes in the United States, and not just like passing the border as a crime, but like crimes within the US. And in terms of like Trump deporting more or less people, I mean, if again, I would just appeal to looking at like the entire picture of like what is like a pro versus an anti-immigration stance, because like deportations are varied like in terms of like world events, right? Like you might be having more or less immigrants coming in based on like things that happen in the world. It doesn't necessarily have to be only US policies. Which is a lot of the reason why Obama had so many people coming in as well. It was because of crises in South America.
Sure, but I would say that the crises in South America are still, as far as I'm aware, are still as bad currently, if not. I think with what's happening in Brazil, in Colombia, in Chile, I would say that the significantly worse. Also, Honduras, I'm sure, hasn't actually improved in the past 10 years, as far as I'm aware. Like, I don't know if like.
Sure. So okay. Let me just say one thing. So the way that it happened under Obama is that people who would show up at the border and be denied entry, those would be counted as a deportation. That is what changed under Obama. Okay. So I think it's plausible that under a Trump administration, that less people are actually just showing up at the border because Trump has shown to be more hostile against immigrants, and therefore we don't have as many people coming in and getting basically thrown away at the border, and that's why Trump hasn't had that many deportations yet.
But then we come back into the situation of we'd have to go through each individual, all the jobs that happened with regards to the Obama case and see exactly how many, because I feel like at 3.2 million people being deported during the entirety, the 7 years that it was counted for Obama's administration, 8 years, if I don't know, it's 3.2 million in 8 years, like we'd have to figure out if that 3.2 million is, if every single one of those was at the level where it would have been okay for them to be removed from America or sent back, right? And then compare that to the Trump thing. But I feel like at this point we're getting down a rabbit hole of. Sure. I don't know. This is like unrelated. I think this is unrelated to Biden, and I probably should just never have brought it up. I'll just concede that point. You're right. Immigration. We should just boot them out. We'll concede. Barack Obama was great. I'll just concede that point. Okay.
No, I mean, I just think it's important to sort of like talk about sort of the narrative versus like what actually happened in terms of like pure numbers, because there was a lot of misinformation about like Obama's deportation statistics. And I mean, if you look up like I think the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post did like an article about this, and you can also look up.
But if we're going to that thing, though, also if we're still stuck on this, so is Trump operating still? Is Trump still operating under the same deportation thing as Barack Obama was? Or has Trump changed the deportation thing back? So in that case, Trump is still deporting. Underneath deporting us people, right?
Yeah, sure. And I explained why. I mean, it's very plausible that like Trump's overall like immigration rhetoric and like overall just the fact that he's in office means that less people are just showing up at the border because they think they're gonna get fucking shot at the border instead of just like thrown away, because of like he's literally like militarizing the border, right? And okay, well, let's move past this. So in terms of like the further backlash argument, I think that's like the main argument in your video that you state for like the Bernie or busting side. So I think when you talk about like if Trump gets another 4 years, we can get a super progressive person in next time. I don't think that argument like holds to any scrutiny. First off, like Trump getting another 4 years doesn't necessarily lead to a more progressive person getting in, right? Like Trump getting another 4 years might just mean, hey, fascism actually works in the US. So now the Republicans just try more and more fascism, right? Like why would they stop if they see that it works? And the counter argument to that is, well, if Trump gets beat now in 2020, we can see, okay, well, maybe it was actually just Hillary that was the worst fucking candidate in history, as we can see, like, based on data and polling, and fucking Trump was a fluke. And actually fascism doesn't work in the US and we're moving further left.
So you believe that Hillary is Hillary is the worst candidate that's ever been in the US and is worse than anybody else who's been put up?
That was a bit hyperbolic, obviously. Like I'm saying, like Hillary was like one of the worst candidates at that time that could possibly have run. And if you look at like polling at the time and like data, like all of the data points to like the Democratic base being insanely suppressed. Because like people
is currently the Democratic base not still also the suppression is the Democratic base still being quite bad, and also Biden is performing worse than Hillary statistically speaking?
Not at all.
Like isn't he currently at like I believe at this point like Hillary was up 11 points to Trump and Biden is only currently about 5 to 6 points up against Trump?
I mean that depends on like what you want to. I mean I haven't seen those stats.
I mean that was an amalgamation of polling data.
Sure.
Pre-general.
Sure. I mean, again, that wouldn't surprise me because at that time nobody thought Trump was gonna win, right? And now Trump is the incumbent, so there's a big difference between the incumbent being challenged by a Democratic nominee.
Sure, incumbents are less likely to lose.
Yeah.
Generally.
Yeah.
So Trump is more likely to. Trump has a.
So last time it was like like there was no incumbent, right? It was like two candidates from like each party. So it was a different situation, and Trump was like very much an outsider. Like even the Republican Party worked against him until the very end. So I mean, it wouldn't surprise me that Hillary was up more at this point in time. But that doesn't mean that we can't look at how it looks right now as a challenger to an incumbent and say, well, as a challenger coming in against an incumbent, Biden is doing phenomenally. He's driving up like voting in terms of like the primary states that he's had. He's had like record numbers of people showing up. He is polling insanely good against Trump, and especially in the swing states like Florida, he's blowing Trump out of the park. Hillary lost like Florida. Like Bernie was like 20 points behind Trump in Florida, and I think Hillary also got destroyed in Florida. So I mean, I think if we look at sort of, yeah. I
mean, I feel like Florida a if you win Florida, you win the US kind of thing, or is that just one state that like Biden does well in, so it's a focus for Biden?
No, I mean it's a big state, I guess, that went red last time and is looking to go blue this time. So there would be like a pretty big deal. Apart from that, I mean, you can also look. I think Real Clear Politics had a amalgamation of like the polling in terms of swing states, and it said it's looking really good for Biden. Just try and find it.
So I'm pretty sure Florida has the third most electoral votes.
Yeah.
Or not third, like they're top 5.
Yeah, I mean, you can just look Real Clear Politics. If you look at their presidential nomination, you can look at for each individual state right now. I mean, Biden, for each swing state, Biden is winning except one, I believe, last time I checked.
So Florida, Biden is up on Trump by somewhere between 4 to 6 points currently, based on 2 university polls.
Yeah.
3 points Wisconsin.
Oh, can you just link?
I'm just reading CNN.
Can you?
It's not very comprehensive as far as the list goes, honestly. I think there should be better polling one, probably Real Clear Politics or something.
Yeah, I can't find it right now. Is somebody in my chat has the link? I was looking at it. Fuck, I was looking at it like yesterday.
I mean, also the issue of polls, which is why I generally don't like using polls, purely because unless we're willing to go into each and every poll and figure out exactly how they've done their data analysis and how they've managed to who they've been polling and what their polling numbers are, I find them very difficult. Like during the Democratic primaries, I basically had to like repeatedly go into each poll and basically showcase what the actual polling statistics were and stuff, because normally they were very, very out of line with the voting statistics for places. Mostly because a lot of them do a variety of different methodologies of trying to get people involved, so it does kind of affect that.
Yeah, but I mean that's just like social science. That's like political science, right? I mean that is. I mean polling works. Like we can say like in 99% of cases, like polls are accurate in terms of like displaying what they want to display at the time. I mean,
sure. So I'm looking at this kind of thing. Currently, Biden's average in Florida, according to RCP, which uses a averaging for polls, showing Biden is up in Florida by 3.2%.
Sure. Can you post that just real quick?
When am I posting it?
Where by chat?
Sure. I didn't think I was... sorry, when I came to this, I wasn't expecting myself to have to be arguing whether I think Biden can feasibly win or not, because I don't have the political necessary background to make the claim of Biden cannot win this. And generally amongst the people that I talk to, and I'm sure you can talk to any of the people that I hang out with a lot, most of them will say that I quite often say that I don't think that Biden is necessarily guaranteed to lose this general election.
Sure. I mean, I guess I would just move that, and I would say, well, if we look at like national polling, if we look at like swing state polling in terms of like Wisconsin, he's up by 2 points. Florida is up by 3 points. Michigan 5 points. Pennsylvania almost 7 points.
Sorry, I'm just banning one of your chat people. Give me a second.
Wait, one of my people?
I think they're hardcore like defending you, but they just did some fucking cringe shit in the fucking chat.
Hey, don't bully Gutian.
No, it wasn't bullying me. They were going after one of the people, one of my mods, by saying that you know a lot more about minorities dying. Yeah, so the person you said it to is also a minority who knows people who've died in America, who lives in America. I think they know about minorities dying in America. Chill on the fucking...
Okay.
Attempting to tell people that shit, okay?
Okay.
Yeah. I like some cringe crap. Like... the assumption that... I mean, it's dumb. Bad shit. I don't need to go into it.
Oh, are they whitewashing me in your chat?
I mean, I don't need to talk about chats because I have not looked at your chat, and I think it's probably a safe bet.
Well, I mean, I ban people who say...
oh, sure, I'm sure you ban people who call me tranny and shit, but like...
No,
I feel like...
I banned somebody for calling you a he like a second ago as well, so... Sure. Yeah, listen, we don't have to talk about us. Okay, let's go back. Let's get back on track. Sure.
So if we talk, thing that I wanted to bring up here, because it happened very recently, I think it's probably important to so with the and you mentioned it just beforehand, and I want to go back to that before it gets forgotten. But with the argument of the Biden, Bernie would have to ultimately, probably he'd have to bring his platform down to meet the demands of the more conservative people, right? Do you think?
Wait, sorry. Can you repeat that?
So your position that Bernie, if Bernie had got in, would have to have toned down his policies to match the demands of Congress and Senate and people as outside to match that. Do you think that Biden's weaker positions on most of those progressive policies will mean that he's more likely to concede more ground to the Republicans?
Not necessarily. I don't think you can just start at like any position and then sort of bargain down, and then we can say, okay, if you start at 100 and you're always going to lose 2, then why don't you just start at 1,000 and then you can lose 2 and you have like
sure.
90.
Then if that, sorry, just because this is an important thing to get out here, but in the past, Biden has been quite consistent in moving to more conservative positions as a way of attempting to go across the aisle and work with a lot of Republican people. He knows he's been more likely to move to very conservative positions as far as we take in the DNC account. Very conservative for the DNC party.
Sure. I mean, but he's also consistently voted against like conservative stuff, like conservative Supreme Court justices, like conservative bills. I mean, I would say the best characterization of Biden is that he very much toes the party line. Like he very much goes with like the majority of Democrats, and he's very much like a moderate Democrat in that sense. And that's my whole argument, right? My whole argument is that I don't expect Biden to be like some kind of hero for the progressive
Was the
movement.
crime bill a moderate Democrat position?
Which one? The one Bernie voted for?
People just I mean, I'm not here to argue whether Bernie was good or bad, because Bernie had a lot of problems as well that I would have absolutely been 100% on critiquing him over.
I would say that was very much like a mainstream Democratic like bill.
The Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994.
Yeah, I mean, even Bernie voted for that one.
Sure, but I mean, obviously, a position that Biden being the one who wrote and pushed it initially would be possibly a bad, not necessarily bad, but like a. I think that Biden's position, I would argue Biden being more of a moderate with a slightly into conservative than just a direct moderate in the DNC. If only off of the assessment of, I believe Barack Obama's own campaign assessed him as a good VP purely because he was like a concession to the more moderate conservative part of the DNC.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if you want to say, when you say moderate, if you also want to throw in conservative in there, I don't mind. I mean, I think the moderates in US are like more conservative. I just think Biden represents like a mainstream democratic view, and I think that's very evident in his policies that he's proposing. Like he's proposing things that like all the moderate candidates proposed. Even so, I would say Biden is moving further left and giving concessions to someone like Bernie or Warren to try and bring over their voters to his side as well. Like something like he's changed his stance on like college. He's changed his stance on, I think, forgiving student loan debt. He's changed his stance on, what more did he change his stance on? I mean, you can just look up like Biden concessions, I guess. But yeah, those are two things.
Sure, and with that idea of conceding ground to parts of that kind of thing, I think that a very, very recent revelation of the people that are involved in advising the Biden campaign of Larry Summers indicates possibly possibly not an attempt to really appeal to the progressives of the party that much at all. If you've seen that the Larry Summers stuff,
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
So the Biden campaign
elaborate?
recently revealed people who were advising them, and one of the people who's the key advisor to the Joe Biden campaign on the economic recovery post the coronavirus pandemic, and is advising them on economic policy, who's currently who has been consistently, whose people are thinking now, politicians, people involved in the party are thinking this might be possibly him being slated for a Federal Reserve chairman. If you don't know who Larry Summers is, Bloomberg has an article on him that I can chuck in if you want to read it. But basically, Larry Summers is the person responsible for the majority of DNC economic screw-ups in the past 20 years.
Okay.
Specifically, the economic deregulation under Bill Clinton, the the failed attempt to the failed attempt to engage in the Soviet Union post the Soviet Union's dissolution that led to the rise of the Russian oligarchs. He was involved in ending the economic stimulus packages for the recession, which most economists agree led to it not being as the economic stimulus that Barack Obama did not being as functionally great as it could have been. He was also involved in supporting the banks more. That article, I think, goes quite in depth into why the problem, and he's also Larry Summers is the number one on the list of people that Progressive Party do not want involved in the next government.
Sure. So let me read something from the Reuters article I just brought up. It says Biden's campaign's outside economic advisors include Larry Summers. So he would be he's like one of many outside advisors. And then in the article it says, a Biden advisor who asked not to be named said the campaign is in touch with a very large and well-rounded informal network of experts. So he's just one person of like a very large network of experts.
So when is that from? Sorry, when's that article from? Just
Reuters. It's 7 hours ago.
Okay.
And then it also said Joe Biden's will be the most progressive agenda of any president in generations, and he looks forward to his continuing engagement with progressive leaders to build on his existing policies and further the bold goals driving his campaign, that same advisor said. So yeah, I mean, it would seem maybe Larry Summers is like one of maybe I don't know, tens of advisors, maybe hundreds of like experts. He says a very large and broad coalition of experts, and says that Joe Biden still has the most progressive agenda or whatever.
Sure, and the Biden advisor that was linked to the Reuters thing, I mean, the Bloomberg thing says there are 5 people familiar with the involvement of Lawrence Summers, and according to the Bloomberg one, who say that Lawrence Summers is involved in the U.S. economic plan. Like that, his involvement is still a concern, I would assume, to any progressive.
I mean, if he's somebody who's worked with like Democratic campaigns in the past, like many Democratic worked with the Obama campaign, I would expect him to be at least to some way involved. I mean, that doesn't mean he's gonna get like a position in his office or whatever, or like his cabinet, or it doesn't mean he's gonna take like everything he says if he's just one of like tens of advisors or like 100 of advisors. I mean, yeah.
I'm not arguing that there aren't other people involved here. What I'm saying is that his involvement at all, considering his history of economic disasters in relation to DNC, should be of some concern, right?
I mean, sure, but it doesn't seem like he has any big involvement right now. It seems like it's mostly like a red herring of sorts. Like if he's like one of like, let's say 100 advisors, would you say? I mean, it's very concerning. I mean, yeah, to some extent, but it's like
100. Where the fuck did number hundreds come from?
Let's say tens. I mean, it says.
It feels like we're just amping up the numbers now to make his involvement seem less and less relevant, right?
No, but they themselves, like the Biden campaign itself, makes his involvement seem not relevant. Like I read you the quote.
The Biden advisor Reuters said that he is in touch with a very large and well-known people.
Yeah.
The Bloomberg one specifically states that they are in touch with, I believe it was somewhere in the tens of public health and economic advisors. And the 5 people said that he is advising and involved with the economic plan, right? Like his involvement as one of 10 people, or one of 5 economists, because they've listed like 5 economists here, should be of some concern.
Wait, what you're saying does not contradict what I said, right? I mean, or am I wrong?
Well, you took the very large and well-rounded and then said jump to 100.
No. I like every single time I said if he's like one of tens of advisors or like even one of 100. Like that's. I mean, we can move away from the 100 number.
But like the 100 number feels like it's deliberately thrown in there to make it seem like his involvement is like to basically diminutize the involvement, right? Am I?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you're nitpicking. Like I'm reading here that like Obama had like 1,000 officials like working on his presidency. I mean, I don't know. Like if you don't have any evidence and I don't have any evidence to claim, and I say I don't really care, I'm just saying like he's one of a large group that is well-rounded, like from like all corners, and that Biden still sticks to his progressive agenda. I mean, what more do you want?
No, okay. So hold up, because this is fucking. I feel like I'm losing my fucking mind here. Okay. So what you've jumped to now saying that Barack Obama had thousands and thousands of. Okay, so what I'm saying here is that Larry Summers is a very, very consistent element of previous DNC parties, including Bill Clinton, including Barack Obama. He has constantly been slated, for the moderates at least, as one of their top economic advisors that gets involved. his involvement in the Biden thing as one of, they say dozens, or so tens of public and economic health officials, and they mention 4 potential economists. So at current value, as we probably know, one of 4 economists involved in advising Biden on his economic policy going into the next election. And Larry Summers has in previous party things been heavily involved and gotten positions in both of them. Is it not likely then, or is it not a concern the DNC might end up giving him a position again as they have done in the past? And that his word might be taken as very important due to his status in that party.
I mean, again, I would just say that. I mean, I don't know what you're trying to get at. I mean, I'll just reference like the Reuters article and say, I mean, he's part of a like big group of advisors, and like again, like you have like hundreds, maybe 1,000 advisors like during a presidency and campaign. I mean, is it likely that Larry Summers is gonna get something out of that? I mean, I don't know. I mean, again, if you don't have any evidence, like any promises or whatever, I mean, it feels like, again, it's just a red herring.
It's a person who's involved. Okay, we're going to go back. We're going to go back to this one. Like, do I need like a whiteboard or some shit to first? Okay, so let's assume, right, that I'm Biden. Okay, let's assume I'm Biden, and I have a person that is well known amongst the DNC, is well known amongst economists and politics as being someone who has had large involvement, who is opinion is generally respected by large members of the DNC party, who is a big concern for the progressives due to his policies and the beliefs he's had in the past. Let's say that person exists. Now, I have said, an advisor of mine says, okay, we have tens of people who are things, and tens I assume means in that case it's above 10, and I hope it's below a fucking 1,000 if that's the case. Otherwise I say 1,000, but in that situation, is it plausible that me mentioning that I have this person advising me could raise concern amongst people because of his previous involvement, his previous very, very large position amongst other parties, and the knowledge that he definitively wants the Federal Reserve Chairman position or a high-ranking government position, and that he has beforehand been able to obtain a position that allows him to put in large economic policies? Would that as a thing be of some concern? As far as it being a red herring goes, I think red herring here is, all I'm expressing here is that his involvement at all is of concern to progressives.
Okay, so let me repeat myself. So again, you said tens, okay? So if we say tens, I'll say, okay, lowball, let's say 20 people. If you have 20 people advising you, and one of them could be of concern to the progressive movement in terms of like what he's done in the past, I'll repeat myself and say, I mean, is that cause for some concern? Sure. I mean, I don't think that's like a big deal at this moment, but sure. I mean, it could cause like some concern in the future, maybe like 5% concern. Like, I don't know what you want from me.
I'm not trying to percentile concerns here. What I'm saying is that when we're talking about making concessions to the progressive sides here, Larry Summers' involvement is endangering those ideas of concessions.
Sure, but he's already made the concessions to the progressive side. That's my point, right? His policies are already very progressive. Like, he will already be the most progressive president if elected on this on his policies right now. He'll be the most progressive president ever.
Sure, but those policies those policies are not necessarily concessions in the current sense as they were policies that he'd already put in place like last year. Those were Biden policies that he put in before he even got his thing, right? I mean, like, as far as I'm aware, the one concession he's made was it was a minor healthcare concession, which I need to look up again.
No, I mean his entire platform. I feel like you've already addressed this in your video as well. Like, Biden's entire platform is a concession to Bernie Sanders because of the movement that Bernie Sanders has started, right? Like we both agree that Biden is a very moderate / maybe on the conservative side Democrat. Like, do you think a very moderate or like conservative side Democrat would have this platform like 10 years ago or like 5 years ago if Bernie wasn't there? I don't think so. I think his entire platform is a concession to the movement that Bernie has started. And I think not acknowledging that is like a slight to Bernie Sanders. I feel like.
I heavily disagree with that assessment, but all right. So what specific policies have been concessions that have occurred from Biden specifically to progressives in the past few months since Bernie has been dropping? What concessions will have been made to progressives?
Sure. So he adopted. So he adopted Warren's, or to some extent Warren's student loan forgiveness plan. He made concessions on Medicare, like the 5 years that you mentioned. He has made concessions on college as well. He's made a more generous free college plan as well. So that was like 3 big policies that the progressives like campaigned on.
I believe. Okay, so from what I know of these ones here, the student debt one was purely for if students do we have sorry, if you've got any links for these, it would make my whole life a whole lot easier than having to go.
Which one specifically?
Any of them, all of them.
Okay, but do you disagree with, like, do I need to find the Medicare?
No, I need to.
I'll see if I can pull some up.
To figure out.
Sure. Joe, you can just type in Joe Biden concessions. Adopts Warren plan. Here we go. Here's an article from The Hill. Biden announced on Twitter that he's adding Sanders' idea to make public colleges and universities free for families whose income is below 125K. It's a good idea, and after consideration, I'm proud to add it to my platform, he posted. Also endorsed Warren's plan, saying few people in the country understand how bankruptcy hurts working families more than Elizabeth Warren.
So I'm looking through them now. So the Medicare one was lowering the eligibility age from 65 to 60.
Yeah, sure.
That was the big concession I can see here.
No, that was one of them. You're asking me what concessions, and I told you 3 concessions that he made.
Cool. I'm just going through. I am looking at an article and going through the concessions list there to figure out exactly what the big ones were. So, 65 doesn't actually feel like a concession to a new swelling progressive movement, especially because there was the Democratic Party in 2000 proposed Medicare enrollment at 55 for everybody. So I'd call that probably more of a milquetoast than a progressive concession, right?
I feel like that's a non sequitur. Like, you asked me what concessions he made to like the progressive people, and I listed you concessions, and now you're arguing that they aren't big enough concessions. I mean, hey, I was all in on Bernie. I mean, I think college should be free, Medicare should be free, all of these things. I'm just saying these are the concessions that he made.
So wait, hold up. So the argument you've just made is that I asked you to give concessions because I'm trying to make the argument here that Biden, because you were arguing against my thing previously by saying that Biden has already made a lot of concessions.
He has. Yeah.
I'm arguing that Biden's concessions have been anywhere near enough to convince people to vote for him. And then I'm listening through concessions, and I'm going through the concessions and pointing out how they're not. Hillary Clinton wants to roll it to 55.
Sure. So what I'm saying is you might not personally think it's enough for the progressives to move to his side, but it seems like he has sort of the broad democratic support behind his plans, and what he's doing with concessions is that he's saying, well, I'll give concessions to, even if you don't want to talk about the 5 years of Medicaid, which I still think is a pretty big deal, you can talk about his college plan that he conceded like to Bernie that I just read you, or like his student loan debt plan that he, or like bankruptcy plans that he conceded to Warren. I mean, those are also like pretty big concessions, I would say, based on like where his platform was. And again, I would say that this is like Biden's entire platform. Again, Biden's entire platform is already a concession to the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party in terms of like stuff like $15 minimum wage, like fucking abolishing private prisons, and like, have you seen his new crime bill? I mean, it's pretty good stuff.
Sure. Okay. So does your entire argument here of Biden being actually considering to progressions, does it base itself purely in the fact that DNC is already progressive?
No.
because almost every concession that you've listed are, you were arguing beforehand, are now effectively just part of the general the general DNC party line.
Okay, so there might be some so there might be some misunderstanding in terms of so I'm using the word concession 2 times. So there are 2 types of concessions that I've mentioned, okay? The first one is that I think, in general, Biden's entire platform is a concession to the more, or like his entire platform that he ran on this time around was a concession to the more progressive parts of the party. That was concession number 1. Then you're asking me, what concessions did he make in terms of bringing Bernie's supporters over once Bernie didn't have a chance to win? And then I listed you 3 concessions that he's made since then to sort of try and bring over Bernie's voters. So there's like 2 types of concessions. It might be confusing because I used the concession.
Okay, and I am going through, and I want to go through those concessions as I've been trying to do here, going through those concessions and saying how these concessions aren't necessarily concessions to progressives as much as they are weaker concessions or weaker policies that have been put out by the Democrats in the past. They're less progressive than even like the Democrat Party has been in the past.
They're concessions to Bernie's platform. I don't understand.
But the weaker concessions. You're arguing that like the concessions here are getting big concessions, or there's more concessions.
Okay.
They're less.
Can you go through Biden's college plan? Do you think Biden's college plan is a weaker concession, like giving free college to like historically black and minority colleges, giving free college to households under 125K, giving 2-year free community college to everyone? Like, these things, are they just weaker concessions to like things that happened in the past? I would say that's pretty radical concessions.
I mean, like, I can pull it up and I can go through it now if you want. I wasn't prepared exactly for this. Apparently, I'm underprepared, which is classic me. But I can go through each one of these kind of things here. So,
I mean, we're talking about like Biden's policies. I mean, you brought them up on your video as well. Okay, maybe okay. Listen, maybe let's instead of like looking up like policies right now and reading, maybe let's talk about sort of the. Let's talk about something that we don't necessarily need data to talk about. So let's talk about sort of the aspect of like bringing a more dangerous fascist into office, like the Bernie or Buster position, right? So if I'm, I guess let me try and characterize sort of the busting position, okay? I think you said this in your video as well. You said that the busting position is that if Trump gets another 4 years, that opens up the sort of Overton window for it to swing further left, and we get a more progressive person in office. And if Biden wins now, it's going to move even further right next time.
Sorry, I was busy reading the college thing. Okay. So, I mean, it feels like when I'm reading them, like I'm reading the New York Times. This one, I don't know if you like the New York Times, or if they're all.
No, New York Times is fake news.
Who's not fake news? But so from what I can see here, the position I'm taking up here still stands, right? In that Biden's proposal that he's putting forward is less expansive than the Bernie Sanders one, and is actually more in line with Hillary Clinton's one that she proposed in 2016.
Sure, and Hillary Clinton proposed some pretty progressive policies in 2016. Yeah, because of Bernie.
Sure, but the problem, here is,
yeah, where Clinton ended up was way more progressive because of what Bernie Sanders did basically during the primary.
Sure, I'm not okay. So the difference here is between. I'm not diminishing the fact that the DNC has moved further into progressive ideas in the past 4 years, since the 2016 election, since that kind of stuff. What I'm saying here is that their recent concessions will not be or I think are unlikely to be viewed as concessions by the progressives, because they are similar or the exact same to, or worse in certain cases, than previous concessions that have been made in the past, right?
Well, then
and they are, in fact, if anything, in line with the general attitude that is currently being held.
Okay, I mean, if your point is that if your point is that the general Democratic Party is pretty progressive, then I mean, sure, if that's like where you wanna go,
is progressive in comparison to where it was 4 years ago, or where it was 8 years ago. That's I don't like. I don't want to say that the Democrat Party is a progressive party now, because that would be, I think, very incorrect with regards to the way American politics is functioning right now. But I think that because, I mean, the economic policies seem to be relatively weak in comparison to, I mean, I can already tell this is a waste of my time as I'm saying it. I'm not going to go into it.
Sure. So okay. So if you look at sort of the, I guess what Trump is proposing and like what the Democrats and like the Democratic Party as a whole are proposing, it seems like the Democratic Party is proposing stuff like a $15 minimum wage, like a big expansion of healthcare, like battling the insurance companies, like free college to some extent, like relieving student loan debt, like abolishing private prisons, like gun reform, like all of these things. And the Republican Party is proposing the opposite of all of those things and like actively taking away people's healthcare and stuff like that. It would seem like a pretty slam dunk to advocate for like pretty much any like Democratic nominee, right?
Sure. I am not here in this debate right now to argue that Trump or the Republicans are better than the Democrats or Biden.
No.
I'm going to refer you back again to the beginning of this conversation when I very clearly said, if you are on the fence or you are uncertain about who to vote for Biden. I am telling you to vote for the Democrats and for Biden. What I am saying is this argument that progressives should vote for Biden and then go in hard on supporting Biden rather than being critical of Biden and asking for more concessions that are more in line with the current progressive platform seems to me like a ignorance of the capability that the Progressive Party should be able to have.
No, but
it feels like refusing the influence that they can have by just giving up and being like, oh well, yeah, that's concession is good enough, fine, whatever.
Sure, but if we both agree that like the general Democratic platform this time around is more progressive than it's ever been and is increasingly more progressive, and he did give some concessions again in terms of like where the other candidates were proposing compared to like what he was proposing himself, then I would say, well, we're already getting those concessions. I would say now grandstanding and saying, well, we won't vote for Biden if you don't like give even more concessions. It seems kind of like counterproductive in sort of passing like these.
Sure, and I'm not agreeing with the Bernie or bust. I've made it very clear that I'm not on the side of Bernie or bust here.
Yeah.
But what I am against in general, I'm against both of the Bernie or bust or the vote blue no matter who argument, because I think both of them are completely fucking moronic. I think both of them ignore any kind of power that you can have as a group or as an individual in the political system in any way, shape, or form by effectively conceding any power you have over to just supporting who's in charge no matter what. Whether that's fucking Biden as the vote blue no matter who and just going, oh, well, fine, it's the Democrats that are better right now than the Republicans. Fuck it, I won't bother like criticizing anything, right? Or if it's the fucking Bernie thing being like, oh, well, Bernie's not in there for I give up because he's the only person I cared about. That both of them are terrible positions to take. I'm not defending either one of them. But what I'm saying here is the weird focus we have on defending Biden to the point that it seems to be ignoring the fact that we could be and should be putting pressure on Biden to be further left, if anything. Especially if you're a progressive or you view yourself as a progressive person, you should be encouraging people who are going to push that policy further left. Then it just feels weird to me. It just feels like a weird position to be taking.
Okay, so this is my position, okay? This is my position. And I mean, I'll defend blue no matter who after this as well. My position is, right now, if Biden would not make any more concessions and he would not do anything else to go further left, I still think everybody should advocate for voting for Biden, even if he makes no more concessions. While that's being said, if he would make more concessions, that would be nice, but I don't expect him to necessarily. And I think whether or not he makes those concessions doesn't change that you should most definitely vote for Biden if you can. Do you agree or disagree with that? Like,
so I agree with the initial point, but I don't like the way that you're phrasing. I feel like the way that you reach the conclusion, the methodology you use to reach that conclusion, is a poor methodology. Where effectively you'd be like, oh,
why?
So from what I can gather from what you said effectively, even if he doesn't concede anymore, and I don't expect him to concede anymore, and I won't put pressure on him to concede anymore, I should vote for Biden.
No, those are two. Oh wait, so those are two different. Those are two very different arguments, right? So the first one is, should Biden concede more? Yes, I think he should. From my personal politics, like I'm a socialist, like I believe in like I'm way further to the left than probably Biden and probably Bernie as well. Should Biden concede more to my side? Yes. Now, if Biden doesn't do that, should you still advocate for him and vote for him? Yes, very much so. Because even with his current platform, even with his current concessions, he is by and large so much more better than Trump, and he would be the most progressive president like in recent history.
Right, but the unique position of being able, and like I said, I'm not necessarily saying that you should put your pressure on Biden by saying that, oh, I'm not going to vote for you, because I don't know what the I don't know the statistical number of people here, but as far as I'm aware, especially if we look back at Hillary Rodham Clinton, which I'm not going to go into the confusion that I've had about HRC, because you apparently seem to really hate her, but also agree that she was pretty progressive, so I'm really confused.
No, I never. Wait, I didn't say I hated her. Like I said, she was a bad candidate.
The hate was a hyperbole for the use of the conversation. When I said hate, I mean that you said that she was one of the worst candidates Democrats ever.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that I.
But her policies are very similar to Biden's at this point.
Yeah. I mean, okay. So wait. So there's a disconnect here. So I'm not saying that I personally.
Sorry, give me a second. Okay, sorry, go on.
Yeah, so I'm not saying that I personally disliked her or her positions. I think she was just a really bad candidate at the time. Like, those are two different things, right?
Okay, so you think her policies were fantastic. You think that what she was doing was great. It's just that as far as who she was personally speaking, as far as someone who just wasn't able to engage people, who maybe has some issues when it comes to presenting their policies in a way that gets people to actually think that they know what they're talking about or appeals to them.
Yeah,
maybe has a problem where they keep telling people to not vote for them, perhaps. Anything like that. You'd sort of make them
are you trying to do the "this is actually Biden" thing?
Oh no, I'm not even. I don't even trying to cover this at all. I think Biden very clearly has a lot of fucking issues in regards to getting people to vote for him.
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, if you look at all the numbers, I think the numbers disregard this concept completely. Like,
but all the numbers for Hillary were great too.
No, not to this extent. You can.
They were greater.
No.
The polls at the time when Hillary was running against Trump, her numbers. What do you mean? No.
We went through this. So we went through this again, and I looked at the numbers very extensively. Okay, for the time, the election again, this is a very different election. This is an incumbent versus a challenger from the different party. I agree. When there is no incumbent, Hillary versus Trump, Hillary was doing really well in polling, and she was further ahead for most of the election. I completely agree. But that changed because of some scandals towards the end. What I'm saying now is that Biden, even while being a challenger to an incumbent, is doing amazing in every single data point that you can possibly muster, and he is pushing Democratic voting base numbers up. Like, more people are showing up to vote for Biden than any other candidate in the primary, and he is driving record amount of numbers in the primaries to come out and vote for him. That is what I'm saying.
So primary voting was up 33%.
Yeah.
From 1.6 million to 1.2 million, or other way around, but still.
Okay, from 2016.
Yeah.
Okay, but so the numerical thing. Okay, so because I'm trying to find the example here that Clinton was doing worse than Biden was.
I want you to join
the
dark
side. Numerically
side.
speaking,
Yes,
Clinton is hovering as well as Biden, if not better, on most polls, even near the end, right?
Wait, what are we talking about now?
I'm talking numerically speaking. I don't see the massive amount of difference between Clinton and Biden's platforms, their policies, and the way that they engage with voters.
Okay, so let me try and make this clear. So at the time, the difference is that during the 2016 election, there was no incumbent, and Trump was very much an outsider to politics. And for the largest part of the election, nobody knew if Trump could actually be a politician and be a president. Okay, now Trump is the incumbent president, and Biden is a challenger. For a challenger to be doing so great against the incumbent is a big deal. There's very much two very different elections happening, right?
Okay, so I mean, this would require me to pull up, I think, probably decades of data around like incumbents versus things to try and figure this out exactly, and also we need to figure out exactly the Biden position and whether or not Biden is, as far as it goes, a less scandal involved politician than Clinton, right? One of your points with that was
so just to be clear about my position, I don't think that you need to pull up decades of numbers of polling data to prove my point.
I'm saying that for me to be able to even compete with what you're saying here, I'm gonna have to go around digging for this shit.
Wait. So actually, you don't have to. All you have to do is trust that people who work full time with polling and do their job are actually somewhat competent at what they're doing, right? Because what you're saying that you're either A, calling into question the current polling, or B, saying that the polling is drastically going to change. And if you think the polling is drastically going to change, then you have to sort of present evidence to that happening.
No. I'm not calling all the polling people complete fucking morons. What I'm saying here is for me to be able to come up against you and say that, oh well, actually, yeah, you know, you're wrong about those numbers, about how, you know, an incumbent and yada yada doing this well against someone else, especially with regards to their polling things, clearly showcases an issue, that kind of thing. I would need to go around digging in other presidents who are perhaps equivalent to Trump to go and pull their numbers as well. But
I don't think there are any presidents who are like equivalent to Trump. I mean, if you look at like something like 538, so 538 recently made an article about how Trump's favorability rating is actually at record low numbers, like based on like recent presidents. Like it's insane how actually unpopular Trump is as a president with everything except Republicans. So I mean, that just goes to show, I think personally that any single Democratic challenger would have beaten Trump based on the numbers at hand.
So the argument you're making there as well, also hit that you said the recent presidents. I said I'd be wanting to go back further to look at other presidents as well. Because I feel like there's no equivalent presidents in recent history that had the same level of issues as Trump has had, right?
Sure, I mean, but at some point that becomes like negligible difference. Like if you go back 100 years and find something that you think is like a bit similar, does prove a point. Like today, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say so. I mean, the parties were very different places. I think that the best way to look at it is like very recent history.
Sure, but then we fall into the same mistake that I believe a lot of political analysts in the US concede as a big issue with trying to judge these politics, which is that it's very, very difficult to make definitive predictions.
Of course, I mean,
in the US political scene.
I mean,
so at that point, then we basically reach this concession where neither of us can really do anything here. This is all pointless. We should just go to something else.
No, I disregard that. So just because it's very difficult to make predictions doesn't mean that it's A, impossible, or B, that we shouldn't do it. And I think the best way to do it personally, I think, is through data points and numbers and maybe like recent history or like events or like predictions. In terms of, let's say there's a catastrophe looming in the air that might fucking sink the ship of Joe Biden or whatever to enough that like this trend is gonna reverse. Because right now, like from all the data in like every single national poll, like in every single swing state, it seems like Biden is gonna beat Trump.
And then I bring up, every single swing state, it looked like the Hillary was going to beat Trump. Then you'll say, well, Hillary and Biden was a different election. And I'll say, this one was a different election too. I don't know if we can necessarily make those kind of bold, definitive claims about Biden, especially with his numbers dropping in past 3 or 4 weeks.
Wait. So just again, this point about Hillary. So when I say current polling says X, and you say, well, current polling said X in 2016, you're saying you don't trust the current polling. Or you're saying we cannot trust the polls right now because they said the same in 2016. Is that the point you're trying to make? Or
No.
What's your
So
point?
what I'm saying there is that I am matching the polling data you are presenting me against a recent election as part of a way of trying to draw an overall analysis.
But what is the point?
The point of this is that the polls are, as we saw in 2016 as well, and I think we see in 2012 and 20, any fucking year you want to pick, polls are incredibly flexible. They bounce around an awful lot, and I feel like pointing at the polls as they are right now, especially because we're in just coming to the end of March? I don't know what month it is. coming to the end of this thing, we've still got months and months to go. I think pointing at this and saying that this is a clear indicator of the fact that Biden has got this one in the bag, or is in the best position possible, I think is a bold claim to make, especially because we haven't even begun to move into the real general election. In recent weeks, we've seen Biden's numbers dropping across the board nationally. He dropped from plus up as an average of 6 to an average of 3 nationally.
No. He's like an average of 6 right now nationally.
I'm sorry, I'm going to look back at my thing.
Yeah, I mean you can on RCP you can look this up. Like there was even some recent polls that had him up by 11 points. Here we go. I linked it in the Whereby chat.
Is it fair to say at this point that we've moved so far away from the original argument that it's...
I mean, depends on what you think the original argument was, I guess. Like what what I'm trying to convince you is I think that content creators like yourself and to a lesser extent me and like public figures and whatever, I do not think you should be sort of ambivalent about Biden. I don't think you should say, well, maybe it would be good if Biden wins. I think it is very clear that if a Biden victory comes, it will be much better for the United States, but more so much better for the entire world. And I would say Biden has a very good chance at beating Trump. Like those are the two narratives that I want to try and attack. And like I'm not saying you're a burn, you're a buster or whatever. You have expressed like some, I guess, anti-Biden sentiment or whatever, or you've said we shouldn't like defend Biden or whatever. So that's.
Oh, I've expressed some incredibly hostile against Biden sentiment.
Yeah.
Let's not demonize what I've been saying towards Biden here.
I mean, you have some spicy tweets here and there. That's for sure.
I mean, I'll be real with you. If Biden died tomorrow and got replaced with someone else, I'd be much happier. I don't even care who it is at this point. Anyone else in the fucking DNC.
Okay. All right. Let me ask you.
Pete. I'll take Pete. Give me Pete.
Okay. Let me ask you.
Delaney.
Actually, I have an interesting question. So if Biden died tomorrow, and I would also prefer Delaney, but that's because of his amazing abs. But let's say Biden died tomorrow, okay, and he was replaced by a candidate who had a much worse chance at beating Trump, like a much worse. Let's say he would poll, like his polling would be, it would be Trump favored in the same way that it's Biden favored now. Would you prefer that? Or would you prefer Biden not dying? I'm sorry, did that make sense?
It's a hypothetical, and I'm not sure why I need to answer it. Right? This seems like a hypothetical that has no real import to the conversation.
No, I'm asking. Right? I'm asking you, like, because you said
if Biden died and another candidate who is just another candidate of any kind came up and that candidate was doing worse than Biden, then I would want to support that person. So you're basically saying that I want the Republicans to win?
No, would you have another?
What else?
No, okay,
like, give the person who's been replaced as something like, give them like some kind of little teaser, right? Be like, oh, that person is far more left than Biden ever was. Like,
sure. Let's say it's Warren. Let's say it's Warren. Okay.
Sure. Let's say it's Warren.
Yeah. Would you prefer, like, if Warren was polling worse as she did in like the swing states and like nationally whatever against Trump? Like, would you prefer it's Warren or would you prefer it's Biden who's currently polling the best, and was polling the best for like most of the election?
You're gonna excuse me because yet again I still need to ask the exact question. What is the point of this hypothetical? What is the attempt to get me to concede to here?
So the point of this hypothetical is to ask you, what do you value the most? Like, do you value Biden's current platform and policies and him being the best candidate to beat Trump? Or would you rather have a more progressive candidate who had a lower chance of beating Trump? Because this is the calculation, I promise you, this is the calculation that the DNC has also done. Because the DNC got behind Biden because the majority of the Democratic voter base has at the number one issue is beating Trump. And Biden...
Right, and so you dismiss the concerns that... you could just dismiss any concerns that the DNC rallied around Biden because Biden was the candidate that was more in line and rallying around him allowed them to remove the candidates who might have challenged the DNC to be further left than they were comfortable doing? Was that?
I mean, I think that generally the DNC rallied behind like the majority of the Democratic Party's vote at the end.
Sure, and then we could also argue that the DNC also did the exact same thing with Hillary Clinton, and that proved to be a complete fucking mess. So does the DNC have the best people at its core to understand this?
I mean, again, I would say in terms of like the election back then, like Bernie was nowhere near where he was this time. Like Bernie got blown the fuck out like in 2016. Like, listen, Bernie did good, but like he got blown the fuck out based like compared to this time around where Bernie had an actual chance of winning. So I don't like in 2016, like Hillary was the candidate that the Democratic Party had. I mean, she was a shitty candidate. I mean, and even at the time where Hillary was picked, like the scandals weren't that great for Hillary not to be. Again, all the polling showed at the time that Hillary was gonna beat Trump. Like, what else is the DNC gonna base their support on if not the data and the analysis work that they're doing and like independent organizations are doing?
But so the argument this time could be, the polling for it was varied, was that a lot of candidates had the best chance of beating. In fact, I believe every single candidate that ran against here, it was like a major candidate in the DNC, was going to beat Trump nationally. Every single one.
Which election?
Had a percentage chance. This one.
Warren,
Pete,
sure,
fucking Amy, like all of them were numerically according to polling data.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was like. Some of them were like really close, like beating him by like 1 point or whatever. Nationally, again, very important. We're talking nationally and like in swing states. So in swing states specifically, like somebody was like Biden was doing insanely well. Like if you looked at Florida polling, which is like one of the big swing states with like the most electoral votes, like Bernie was blown the fuck out in Florida. He was at like 36, I believe, against like Trump's like 40 something, 48, and like Biden is winning against Trump. So that's like a difference of like 20 points between those two candidates in like one of the biggest swing states that went red last election.
Bernie had stronger performances than Biden in other states that were out there that were important ones.
Not in
Biden is performing poorly.
Yet
Again, I feel like we're
not in the swing states.
I feel like we're putting an awful lot of hope into Florida here, which I don't know if Florida is going to swing blue. I think it's very optimistic.
I mean, I'm just basing my knowledge based on the polling. I mean, I don't know.
Sure, and we've talked about the fact that the polling is quite often difficult to pass out as far as a reliability goes.
I mean, the polling is the best information we have at this time. I don't know.
Yeah, it's the best information. It's not great information. That's been a consistent problem with doing political analysis, is that we have polling data, but polling data isn't necessarily the best methodology for determining things, right?
I mean, yes. I mean, I would say it is pretty much, yeah. I mean, like if you actually like read the polls and like understand how they works, I would say they are very accurate. Like most of the time, like they were very accurate to predict who was gonna win the Democratic nominee this time around. I mean, the polls said Biden was gonna be the Democratic nominee, and even though I believed Bernie could win, the polls said it was gonna be Biden, and it was Biden.
Didn't those polls bounce around like crazy? Over the course of like a couple of months, like they didn't those polls like vary drastically? Like as far as I'm aware, like they're like in some days they showed someone else winning, or they showed like it moved around quite drastically.
It depends
like an aggregate of those polls.
Again, depends on what you mean by moving around drastically. And number one, and number two, even if they did move around drastically, again, this is why we always take most current polling into account. Like I wouldn't look at like polling for the last 2 months to determine how a candidate is doing, right?
And then we fall into the issue yet again where I feel like we're stuck on the polling thing currently, when I thought we were talking about Biden's policies and political position rather than Biden's polling data 6 months out from the election.
Sure. So the reason why I'm talking about, again, those are many different arguments here. So the first argument is, why is Biden the current nominee? And the reason why Biden is the current nominee is because that is the will of the Democratic voting base, or like in total, right? That is the will of the Democratic voting base in total, and he is the #1 candidate to beat Trump. And then we can talk about, well, should you advocate for Biden? And then I would say, well, I mean, hey, he is the candidate for the Democratic Party. Majority of the Democratic Party got behind him. Bernie Sanders got behind him. AOC got behind him. His policies would be the most progressive policies of any candidate in recent, history. And he would be moving the policies of the Democratic Party significantly left to even have some policies that even Bernie Sanders was campaigning for very vehemently on his policy platform. I would say that's a pretty big victory for the progressives and for the Democratic Party overall. And then you would also have the added benefit of kicking Trump out and fucking laughing at the conservatives.
So I zoned out right after you said the will thing, and I just all I could think was just trying for the will. I'm really, really tired. If we have anything final thing, could you do some final shit?
Oh, sure.
I'm exhausted. It's been a long fucking day.
That's fair. I just woke up, so.
Yeah, Dari, if you want to do your final thoughts.
No, I mean, at the end of the day, I think, as I believe I said that yesterday, and I said this at the start as well, I think you're, way more reasonable than, a lot of other people who talk about, Bernie or bust or whatever, and you're obviously not Bernie or bust, and I hope I didn't, try and force you into that position or whatever. I just wanted to talk about, is Biden actually a force for good? To some extent, if you can actually say that, and isn't just a terrible person who would be almost as terrible as Trump. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
And you, Gutian?
Cool. I would just say that in a general sense, the concept that Biden being where he is right now, I think is has been the will of the DNC voters, has been the power of the people expressing itself through its voice in the electoral system. I think it proves a completely inability to understand the issues and the severe issues with the way that the media operates and the way that the American system operates with regards to reducing voters' impact and reducing the way people have their voices transferred across and the way that they demonetize certain voices and opinions. And to that end, the will of the DNC is very different to what might be the will of the general voter who would be Democratic. Manufacturing consent and all that jazz.
Yeah, for sure. All right. You guys want to go ahead and shout yourself out? Dario?
Sure, yeah. I'm twitch.tv/ScuffedDario and twitter.com/ScuffedDario. If you like debate content, if you like politics, if you like leftism, give me a follow.
And Gutian?
I'm fine. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
All right. And yeah, hopefully we're still talking Monday, Gutian, if that's cool. But
yeah, I think I'm on a Chud Logic panel, but maybe after or before that, depending on if that's actually happening or not, because I'm not sure.
I'll be free all day long, so.
Okay, sweet.
All right, guys. Thanks for. I feel like I was useless. You guys pretty much moderated yourself. You guys are very polite. There was not much talking over each other, so.